The blood-red sunset cast Emma Fuller's shadow long across her porch as she clutched the Winchester rifle in her trembling hands, her eyes fixed on the horizon where she'd buried her husband just 6 months prior. Some nights, like tonight in the autumn of 1878, she could swear his silhouette appeared at the edge of her property, watching, waiting, making her question her own sanity in the vast emptiness of the Wyoming Territory. "I know you're not real, Robert," she whispered to the twilight air, her voice carrying across the silent homestead. "You're gone and not coming back." The ranch had once been their shared dream, 40 acres of promise in the shadow of the Grand Tetons. Now it stood as her prison, a daily reminder of everything she'd lost. The crops were failing, the cattle thin, and winter approached with merciless certainty. Emma hadn't slept properly in weeks, her nerves frayed from constantly checking windows and doors, convinced Robert's restless spirit was trying to tell her something. The distant sound of hoofbeats made her stiffen, raising the rifle to her shoulder. A lone rider appeared, silhouetted against the darkening sky. Emma narrowed her eyes, finger hovering near the trigger. Strangers meant trouble out here, especially for a woman alone. "That's close enough," she called out when the rider was within earshot. "State your business or turn around." The man pulled his horse to a stop, raising both hands to show he meant no harm. "Name's Thomas Alderman, madam. Just looking for shelter for the night." His voice carried clearly across the yard. "Storm's coming in from the north. I can pay for accommodations." Emma studied him carefully. He sat tall in the saddle, a lean figure in a dust-covered duster and wide-brimmed hat. The fading light caught the glint of a star pinned to his vest. "You're the law?" she questioned, rifle still raised. "US Marshal," he confirmed. "Heading to Casper on business. I'd be obliged if I could stay in your barn tonight. Won't trouble you none." Emma hesitated. It had been months since she'd spoken to anyone besides the occasional trader. Part of her yearned for human conversation, while another part, the cautious widow who'd learned the hard way that the frontier was unforgiving, remained suspicious. A cold wind swept across the porch, and for a moment, Emma felt the familiar chill that always accompanied what she'd come to think of as Robert's presence. Her eyes darted to the corner of the porch where the sensation was strongest. The marshal noticed her distraction. "Everything all right, madam?" "Fine," she said quickly, lowering her rifle slightly. "You can use the barn. There's fresh hay in the loft." Thomas Alderman dismounted with the easy grace of a man who'd spent most of his life on horseback. As he led his horse toward her, Emma could see him better early 30s, she guessed, with a weathered face that had seen its share of hardship. A thin scar traced along his jawline, disappearing beneath a short beard streaked with premature silver. "Much obliged," he said, stopping at the bottom of the porch steps. His eyes, a sharp, clear blue, studied her face before glancing to the dark corner of the porch where Emma's attention had been drawn moments before. Something in his expression changed, a flicker of understanding. "Been alone here long?" he asked quietly. 6 months, Emma replied, unsure why she was volunteering information to a stranger. "Since my husband died." The marshal nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving that shadowed corner. "Madam, I don't mean to presume, but your husband's shadow still haunts this porch, doesn't it?" Emma felt the blood drain from her face. "What did you say?" Thomas Alderman's expression remained solemn. "I've seen it before. Sometimes the departed don't rest easy when things are left unfinished." He gestured toward the door behind her. "Step inside. Light beats ghosts, as my grandmother used to say." Emma stared at him in disbelief, her heart hammering in her chest. No one had believed her when she'd mentioned feeling Robert's presence. The few neighbors within riding distance had attributed it to grief, to her imagination running wild in her loneliness. "You can see him?" she whispered. "Not see exactly," Thomas explained, "but I can sense when something's not at peace." He paused, then added with unexpected gentleness, "The barn offer still stands, but I reckon you might benefit from a conversation more than I would from shelter. Sometimes sharing a burden makes it lighter." The first fat raindrops began to fall as Emma made her decision. She stepped back, opening the door to her home. "Come in, Marshal. I've got coffee on the stove." Thomas tied his horse under the porch overhang before following Emma into the modest cabin. The interior was neat but sparse, with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area, and simple furnishings. A quilt in various shades of blue and green covered a rocking chair near the fire, clearly a treasured possession in a home with few luxuries. Emma busied herself with the coffee pot, grateful for the distraction. Having a stranger in her home felt odd after months of solitude, but there was something reassuring about the marshal's presence. He moved with a quiet confidence, removing his hat and duster and hanging them on a peg by the door with practiced ease. "How did you die?" Thomas asked, settling into a chair at the small table. Emma nearly dropped the mug she was holding. "Excuse me." "Your husband," he clarified. "How did he pass?" She poured the coffee with hands that had started trembling again. "Fever. It came on sudden, after a hunting trip. Within 3 days he was gone." The memory of those terrible days rushed back, Robert's skin burning hot to the touch, his delirious ramblings, the doctor from the nearest settlement arriving too late. "I'm sorry," Thomas said simply. He accepted the coffee, watching Emma over the rim of his mug as she took the seat across from him. Was anything unusual about his passing? Emma stared into her own cup. Besides the fact that a healthy man of 35 succumbed to fever in 3 days? Besides the fact that I've felt his presence here ever since. Her voice took on a bitter edge. Or perhaps you mean the part where he kept repeating a name I didn't recognize while delirious? Thomas's eyes sharpened with interest. "What name?" "Catherine," Emma said. "He kept calling for Catherine. I assumed it was the fever making him confused." Thunder rolled in the distance as the promised storm drew nearer. Emma rose to light the oil lamps around the cabin, pushing back the encroaching darkness. As the warm glow filled the room, she found herself continuing to speak, words she'd held inside for half a year pouring out to this stranger. "After he died, I found a letter hidden in his trunk. It was addressed to a Catherine Davis in Denver. I never opened it. I couldn't bring myself to." Emma paused. 2 weeks later, I started feeling his presence on the porch. Always at sunset. Always in the same spot. Thomas nodded slowly. "The unfinished business," he murmured. "Where's the letter now?" Emma hesitated only briefly before crossing to an old secretary desk in the corner. From a small drawer, she withdrew an envelope, sealed and addressed in Robert's distinctive handwriting. She held it for a long moment before placing it on the table between them. "I've been afraid to know," she admitted. "Afraid it would confirm what I've suspected, that he had another life, another." She couldn't finish the sentence. "Another woman," Thomas completed for her. His voice held no judgment. "Mrs. Fuller, in my line of work, I've learned that most people carry secrets. But secrets lose their power when brought to light." He glanced toward the door, where the storm now battered the porch. "Your husband's spirit won't rest until whatever is unfinished finds resolution. And neither will you." Emma took a deep breath and picked up the letter. With trembling fingers, she broke the seal and unfolded the single page within. As she read, her face cycled through expressions: confusion, shock, and finally, something like relief. "It's not what I thought," she said quietly, looking up at Thomas with glistening eyes. Catherine was his sister. Half-sister, actually. He never knew about her until his father confessed on his deathbed last year. She scanned the letter again. Robert was planning to journey to Denver after harvest to meet her. He wanted to tell her that she had family who wanted to know her. Thomas leaned forward. The fever prevented him from fulfilling that promise. "Yes," Emma whispered. She folded the letter carefully. "All this time I imagined the worst. And all he wanted was to connect with family he never knew existed." "Ghosts aren't always what we fear them to be," Thomas observed. "Sometimes they're just reminders of promises we need to keep." Their eyes met across the table, and for the first time in months, Emma felt something other than grief or fear, a flicker of purpose, of connection to another human being who didn't think she was crazy. "I should go to Denver," she said, the decision forming even as she spoke the words. "I should find Catherine and tell her about Robert." "It's dangerous country for a woman traveling alone," Thomas said, though his tone suggested admiration rather than discouragement. "I've managed this ranch by myself for 6 months," Emma replied with a hint of defiance. "I can handle the journey to Denver." Thomas smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him. It transformed his stern features, reaching his eyes and revealing a warmth she hadn't expected. "I don't doubt that for a moment, Mrs. Fuller," he said. "But as it happens, my business takes me through Denver. If you'd accept the company, I'd be honored to escort you." The storm outside intensified, rain lashing against the windows as if emphasizing the shelter they'd found in each other's company. Emma realized that for the first time since Robert's death, she didn't feel the cold presence on her porch. Whether because of the storm, the revelations about the letter, or the Marshal's unexpected companionship, something had shifted. "I accept your offer, Marshal Alderman," she said formally, before allowing herself a small smile. "And please, call me Emma." "Then I'm Thomas," he replied. "Or just Tom, to friends." The storm kept them awake late into the night, planning their journey and sharing stories. Emma learned that Thomas had been a marshal for 8 years after serving in the Union Army during the war. He spoke little of his family, mentioning only that they'd been lost in a fire when he was 20. Like her, he carried grief but had found purpose in protecting others, in upholding justice in territories where law was still more ideal than reality. In turn, Emma told him about growing up in Pennsylvania, about meeting Robert when he'd come east to sell horses, and about their dream of building a life in the West. She surprised herself with occasional laughter as she recounted their early mishaps as homesteaders, Robert's disastrous attempt to milk their first cow, her own failed experiments with sourdough bread. When morning came, Emma awoke on the rocking chair where she'd dozed off, covered with the blue and green quilt. Thomas was already outside, tending to his horse and repairing a section of her fence that had come loose in the storm. The morning light cast the world in clear, washed colors, and for the first time in months, Emma felt something like hope stirring in her chest. Over the next 3 days, they prepared for the journey. Thomas helped with the heavier ranch chores while Emma preserved what food could be saved, packed necessities, and wrote to her nearest neighbor about watching the property. The work created a comfortable rhythm between them, a partnership that felt natural despite their short acquaintance. On the evening before their planned departure, Emma stood on the porch at sunset, watching the horizon. Thomas joined her, his presence solid and reassuring at her side. "He's not here tonight," she said softly. "I don't feel him." "Perhaps he knows you're keeping his promise," Thomas suggested, "that you're finding your way forward." Emma turned to look at the man who had so unexpectedly entered her life. In just days, he had helped her confront a fear she'd been avoiding for months. His quiet strength and unexpected understanding had awakened something she'd thought had died, with Robert a capacity for connection, for trust. "Thank you," she said simply, "for believing me when no one else would." Thomas's eyes met hers, serious and direct. "There are things in this world that can't be explained by ordinary reasoning, Emma. I've seen too much to dismiss what others can't see or understand." His hand found hers on the porch railing, covering it briefly with gentle pressure. The touch sent an unexpected warmth through Emma's body, a reminder that she was still alive, still capable of feeling. "We should get some rest," he said, releasing her hand. "We've got a long ride ahead of us tomorrow." They departed at dawn, Emma taking one last look at the homestead as they rode away. She had made peace with leaving it temporarily, understanding now that the ranch had become as much a prison as a home. The open road ahead, despite its dangers, felt like freedom. The journey to Denver would take nearly 2 weeks on horseback. They traveled steadily through Wyoming territory into Colorado, camping under stars that seemed brighter than Emma remembered. Thomas proved to be a considerate traveling companion, respectful of her privacy, vigilant about potential dangers, and surprisingly knowledgeable about the flora and fauna they encountered. At a small trading post 5 days into their journey, they encountered the first real trouble. 3 rough-looking men took undue interest in Emma, making crude comments as she selected supplies. Thomas positioned himself between Emma and the men without comment, his hand casually resting near his sidearm. The silent warning was enough to keep the men at bay until they departed. That night, as they made camp in a sheltered grove, Emma addressed what had happened. "You didn't have to intervene back there," she said, stirring their supper over the small fire. "I've handled worse." Thomas looked up from where he was brushing down his horse. "I have no doubt you can handle yourself, Emma. But no one should have to face disrespect alone when they have a friend nearby." The word friend hung between them, seemingly inadequate for what was developing. Emma had noticed how her awareness of Thomas had shifted over their days of travel. She found herself watching him when he wasn't looking, the capable way he moved, the quiet intensity in his eyes when he was focused on a task, the rare but transformative smile that sometimes appeared. "Is that what we are? Friends?" she asked, surprising herself with her boldness. Thomas crossed to sit beside her at the fire, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "We started as strangers with a common destination," he said carefully. "I'd like to think we've become friends." He paused, then added more softly, "And perhaps we're journeying towards something more than Denver." The admission hung in the air between them, neither ready to grasp it fully, but both acknowledging its presence. Emma felt a flutter of something that might have been guilt, might have been anticipation. It was too soon after Robert, too unexpected, too complicated. And yet, she couldn't deny the growing connection between them. "One day at a time," she said finally. "1 mile at a time." Thomas nodded, accepting her measured response. "Fair enough." 3 days later, they encountered a different kind of danger. A sudden squall forced them to seek shelter in an abandoned miner's cabin nestled in the foothills. The cramped space brought them physically closer than they'd been during their journey, creating an intimacy that was both welcome and discomforting. As rain pelted the roof, Emma found herself sharing more of her fears about meeting Catherine. "What if she doesn't believe me? What if she thinks I've come to ask for money, or to burden her with painful news?" Thomas considered this as he stoked their small fire. "The truth has a way of making itself known, Emma. You're fulfilling a promise Robert couldn't keep. Whatever comes of it, you'll have done right by him." "And after Denver?" Emma asked, the question that had been building within her finally finding voice. "What then?" Thomas met her gaze steadily. "That depends on what you want. The ranch is waiting if you choose to return. Or, she prompted when he hesitated. "Or there are other possibilities. Other paths." Emma understood what he wasn't saying. In their time together, Thomas had mentioned receiving an offer to become sheriff in a growing settlement near Cheyenne. It would mean putting down roots after years of constant movement. It would mean building something permanent. "I've only just started to imagine a future beyond grief," Emma admitted. "I'm not sure what shape it should take yet." Thomas reached across the small space between them, his hand finding hers. This time, he didn't pull away. "There's no rush," he said. "Some journeys take time." The touch of his hand sparked something in Emma that she'd thought long buried: desire, possibility, the promise of beginning anew. Before she could reconsider, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle, questioning. Thomas remained still for a heartbeat before responding, his hand coming up to cup her cheek with tender reverence. When they parted, his eyes searched hers. "Emma," he said, her name almost a prayer on his lips. "I don't want to be just comfort in a difficult time." "You're not," she assured him, surprised by the certainty she felt. "You're something else entirely. Something unexpected but right." Outside, the storm began to abate, the pounding rain softening to a gentle patter. Inside, something new had begun, fragile but full of promise, like spring growth after a harsh winter. Denver appeared on the horizon a week later, its growing skyline a stark contrast to the wilderness they'd traversed. Emma felt a mixture of trepidation and determination as they rode into the bustling city. With Robert's letter as their guide, they made inquiries about Catherine Davis and discovered she worked as a schoolteacher. They found her at the schoolhouse just as classes were ending for the day. A slender woman with auburn hair was ushering the last children out the door when Emma approached, Thomas a respectful distance behind her. "Miss Davis?" Emma asked, suddenly nervous. "Catherine Davis?" The woman turned, curiosity in her features. "Yes, I'm Catherine Davis. Can I help you?" Emma took a deep breath. "My name is Emma Fuller. I believe you may have had a brother named Robert Fuller." I am his wife." Catherine's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes widening with shock. "Robert? I received a letter from a man claiming to be my half-brother nearly a year ago, but when I replied, I never heard back." "May we speak privately?" Emma asked. "I have quite a story to tell you." Over the next hours in Catherine's modest apartment, Emma shared the tale of Robert's illness, his passing, and the letter she had discovered. She explained about the presence she had felt on the porch, and how Thomas had helped her understand the unfinished business that kept Robert's spirit restless. Catherine listened with tears streaming down her face. "I grew up knowing I was adopted," she explained. "My parents were wonderful people who never hid the truth from me. When Robert's letter came, It was like finding a piece of myself I never knew was missing. When he didn't respond to my reply, I assumed he'd changed his mind about wanting to know me. He never received it, Emma said gently. He fell ill before it would have arrived. From his position near the window, Thomas observed the two women with quiet appreciation. They had different features, different colorings, but something in their expressions as they spoke revealed the connection they shared through Robert. That evening, as Emma and Thomas prepared to find accommodations for the night, Catherine insisted they stay with her. "Please," she said, "I've just found my family. I don't want to lose you so quickly." They accepted her hospitality, and over the next days, a bond formed between the two women. Catherine shared stories of her childhood, her work as a teacher, and her hopes for the future. Emma found herself drawn to Catherine's gentle spirit and quick intelligence, recognizing traits that reminded her of Robert. One week stretched into two as Emma helped Catherine sort through the complicated emotions of discovering and then losing a brother in almost the same moment. Thomas, meanwhile, received a telegram confirming his appointment as sheriff in Cheyenne, due to start in 1 month's time. "Will you accept it?" Emma asked him as they walked along Denver's busy streets one afternoon, enjoying a rare moment alone. Thomas nodded. "I think it's time to stop drifting, to build something that lasts." His eyes met hers. "The question is, what will you do now that you've fulfilled your promise to Robert?" Emma had been considering this very question. The ranch waited, but returning to its isolation held little appeal now. She had discovered, through her time with both Thomas and Catherine, how much she had missed human connection. "Catherine has asked me to stay in Denver," Emma said. "There's a position at her school. They need someone to teach the younger children." Thomas's face remained carefully neutral. "And is that what you want?" Emma stopped walking, turning to face him directly. "What I want is to no longer be haunted by what might have been. I want to move forward, not backward." She took a deep breath. "Cheyenne isn't so far from Denver." Hope flickered in Thomas's eyes. "No, it's not far at all. A person might visit regularly," Emma continued. "Or perhaps, if things develop between two people, one might eventually join the other." Thomas took her hands in his. "Emma Fuller, are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that we continue this journey together, Thomas. Not as a marshal escorting a widow, but as two people who found each other when neither was looking." Emma felt lighter than she had in months, the weight of grief and uncertainty finally lifting. "I'm not ready to make promises yet, but I'm ready to explore possibilities." Thomas's smile was radiant. "Possibilities are all I ask for." 3 months later, Emma stood on the porch of a modest house on the outskirts of Cheyenne. The autumn air carried a crisp chill, but the sunset painted the sky in glorious gold and crimson. Behind her, through the window, she could see Thomas setting the table for dinner, moving with the comfortable familiarity of a man at home. Her teaching position in Denver had evolved into a correspondence program for children in remote areas, work she could do from anywhere. Catherine visited monthly, her bright presence bringing joy and family connection to their lives. The ranch had been sold to a young couple with dreams similar to those Emma and Robert had once shared. As Emma watched the sun sink toward the horizon, she realized she felt no chill, no ghostly presence. Instead, she felt the warmth of new love, new purpose, new beginning. Robert's shadow no longer haunted her, not because she had forgotten him, but because she had honored him by living fully again. The door opened behind her, and Thomas stepped out, wrapping a warm blanket around her shoulders. "Dinner's ready," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You've been out here a while. Everything all right?" Emma leaned into his embrace, a sense of peace washing over her. "Yes," she said. "Everything is exactly as it should be." Thomas's arms tightened around her. "I was thinking," he said hesitantly, "that if you were amenable, we might make things more permanent between us. That is, if you'd consider becoming Mrs. Alderman." Emma turned in his arms, her heart full to bursting. "I would consider it very seriously, Sheriff Alderman," she replied, her voice steady despite the emotion welling within her. "In fact, I believe my answer would be yes." His kiss was tender, full of promise and commitment. When they parted, they stood together watching the last rays of sunlight disappear beyond the western mountains. "You were right, you know," Emma said softly. "Light does beat ghosts, not by banishing them, but by illuminating what truly matters." Thomas took her hand, leading her back inside to the warmth and light of their shared home. "Come inside, Emma. The future is waiting." And as Emma crossed the threshold, she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged, not defined by loss or haunted by the past, but embracing a love that had found her when she least expected it, on a stormy night when a stranger had seen what others couldn't and had helped her find her way from darkness into light.